Mithras appear in Roman society well before the time of Christ, who actually had very similar characteristics as the man Jesus. Did a secret society form from this teaching known as Mithraism? Were some of those secret teachings involving the idea of a solar flash that would transform humanity into the next level of human evolution? And have we misinterpreted ancient Roman texts when they talk about the term golden age, and are they actually talking about something else? A coming golden race in which all people, not any one race, but everyone, if they are ready, transforms into something akin to a being of light. This is what we're going to be talking about in this episode of Wisdom Teachings. There is a pervasive scholarship going on among certain academic circles today where they are trying to deny that the story of Jesus was anything other than a folklore, that it was made up, that it was simply a construct of someone's imagination. And what often is done is a cross-comparative analysis of the story of Jesus with other savior figures, other religious and spiritual leaders who appeared before, and the idea being that the stories are so similar that therefore it's some sort of mythological tale. Now, the way I look at it is that these stories are similar because the universe itself has a divine plan for us, and a galaxy is actually an intelligent being, a cosmic creator, what in the Law of One, and apparently also in ancient texts, is called the Logos. And that is an individuated identity that creates its own unique way that we all have to evolve, which would be called archetypes, these 22 stages of human evolution as described in the major arcana of the Tarot. You have the Fool that originates the journey. You have cards like Strength. You have some very disturbing ones like the Tower of Destruction and the Devil. Then you have other cards that are more inspiring like the Sun and the Chariot and the High Priestess. These apparently refer to different archetypes that we go through as periods of our spiritual evolution. And as I've said before, the collective total of all of those archetypes is known as the hero's journey. It does appear that in certain cases, the mind of the galaxy, the mind of the Logos, tries to embody itself in a human being. And that human being becomes an embodiment of the hero's journey, of the big cosmic story of how you go through those 22 archetypes. And that story is the story with a beginning and a middle and ending. That's the underlying structure of Hollywood films. So Mithras has astonishing similarities to Jesus. And Mithras predated Jesus. There appears to be a virgin birth. There appears to be ascended type of abilities. There appears to be a group of 12 people that followed Mithras around. It's similar areas of the old world where these events took place. But there are other ways in which the philosophy is notably different. Namely, Mithraism turned into a secret teaching. It became a secret society. And perhaps this was a mistake that the Logos made. Perhaps this information was originally intended to be for everyone, and it needed a sort of precursor to test out how this is going to work and figure out how to make sure that it doesn't become a classified secret that is hidden behind the walls of a lodge. That the Mithraic tradition was dealing with the idea of the change from the age of Taurus into the age of Pisces. Mithras appeared during this exact time in the shift in cycles. In my book, The Synchronicity Key, I talk about how the age of the zodiac, this 2,160-year cycle, is a cycle in which time itself repeats and events in time overlap. The way this works is that if you look at the major events in Roman history predating Christ, and then you advance them forward by one age of the zodiac, 2,160 years exactly, that the same wars repeat, the same characters repeat, and the events are astonishingly similar. This sounds crazy, and at some point here on Wisdom Teachings, I'll probably do episodes on this, because the whole second half of Synchronicity Key is loaded with examples of these historical correlations that gap across huge blocks of time. And what I believe is going on ultimately is that it's as if we're moving through spheres of energy, and the spheres are fractal, so that what happens in one sphere happens in the next sphere if they're side by side. So you move through one, events take place, it's like a stylus recording on that sphere, and then when you are in the next sphere, those events tweak you and you experience them again, and they replay in history. And this may be designed by celestial beings to ensure that we work through karma, that you know what's going to happen in the world before you're born. You know if you're going to be born into an era of war, if you're going to be at the right age to be drafted into that war. You can plan out what your karmic needs are and how to fulfill them. So it's interesting that, of course, the end of the age of Pisces as we moved into the age of Aquarius is approximately 2012, and that's only 12 years after the year 2. To be drafted into that war, you can plan out what your karmic needs are and how to fulfill them. So it's interesting that, of course, the end of the age of Pisces as we moved into the age of Aquarius is approximately 2012, and that's only 12 years after the year 2000, but it's 2,160 years that we have for an age of the zodiac. So if you go that extra 160 years backwards, now you're right around the time of Mithras. And this guy, this being, shows up, and he clearly seems to have advanced knowledge. But once again, that knowledge was kept hidden and was made into a mystery school. Many scholars have reported on the astonishing similarity between Mithraic mystery schools and Freemasonry. So much is exactly the same. Mithraism involves a lodge, the size of the lodge, the layout of the lodge, where people sit, what you do in those ceremonies. Everything about it is remarkably similar. And the inescapable conclusion is that Mithraism was the Roman secret society, and as that Roman diaspora went up to England, and they transported their empire there to create the British Empire, then you have the Knight Templars who eventually break off, and they move up to Scotland to escape persecution in the 1300s. They took that original Mithraism, combined it with other mystery school teachings, and created Freemasonry. But the Mithraic core is still very central. So remember this, because Mithraic secrets are Masonic secrets. What the Mithraists know are things that are now considered standard knowledge in Freemasonry and, of course, standard teachings in the dreaded Illuminati. So what that means is that we can go back to the original Mithraic teachings, which still exist, and there's lots of stuff. Leon meaning lion, cephalus meaning head, the lion-headed. So this is an image that you see in Manly Palmer Hall's book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, in which we have a curious stone sarcophagus that looks just like the granite coffer inside the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. That is very likely not an accident. It is the life after death. It is the ascended body, the immortal body. You notice that there are 3 people dressed in robes, clearly spiritual people, bowing before this being, and then what you have is a being emerging from the light who has some very curious symbolism going on here. First of all, you have the multiple wings of the seraphim. So that would indicate one of the highest angels as described in the Bible. This being is also holding a sword, as do the seraphim. So once again, we have the idea of these benevolent beings. Furthermore, one of the seraphim in the Bible was reported to have a lion head, and this being here is also lion-headed. Corey Good and other insiders have reported that there are certain types of ETs that do apparently have leonine-type features on a human body. And that would be consistent with research that has been done clandestinely, suggesting that many of the cool things that are ancient in our solar system were left behind by a lion-headed race. So all of that might have been conveyed with this idea of the Leontocephalus. Also notice that he is holding in his right hand a group of stars, and those stars suggest once again that this being comes from the stars. Lastly, pay close attention to the idea of the serpent coiled around his body, and the serpent is holding a key. The serpent seems to represent this idea of DNA and the idea that DNA in some way will be changed. The serpent also represents Kundalini, to the idea of the serpent coiled around his body, and the serpent is holding a key. The serpent seems to represent this idea of DNA and the idea that DNA in some way will be changed. The serpent also represents Kundalini. The key suggests that there is some sort of opening of a lock, something that has been locked within us. Perhaps the pineal gland, notice the area where the key is, becomes unlocked. There's all these Hindu traditions about the pineal gland. They paint the bindi, the third eye, on their foreheads. The idea of pineal gland awakening caused by the rising Kundalini, this serpent-like energy that goes up the spine and activates your higher consciousness. All of these things are implied in the symbol, and I did actually have someone who self-identified as a member of the Illuminati who tried to turn me on to this symbol and basically said, David, everything that you've been talking about is right here. And sure enough, when I did the research, I found out that he was right. So the Leontocephalus, or lion-headed humanoid, is the central religious figure in Mithraism. And what would happen in the original Mithraic lodge is they would have a statue of this lion-headed being in which there is a hole that goes from the back of the head out through the mouth. And so you see the mouth open here. You notice that you can see the opening goes inside. And when you look at it from a side view, you can't see this exactly, but notice that it's really dark in there. And in fact, if you were to turn this being backwards, you would see that there is a hole on the back of the head. Now, why was this done? Believe it or not, in the original Mithraic ceremonies, there would be an officiating priest, or whatever you want to call him, who would take very hard alcohol in his mouth, very flammable liquidizes, you guessed it, the solar flash. Once again, it's the same teaching. So it seems to me that it's likely that Mithras started as another embodiment of the Logos, of the galactic mind, and this was another set of symbols, another set of teachings intended to tell us that the sun was going to give off a fiery blast. Certain illustrations have survived that show this fiery blast coming out of the mouth, so you know that I'm not making this up. Take a look at this right now. And what you're seeing here not only is the lion-headed god with fire spewing out of his mouth and snakes coming off of his body holding two torches, but notice that he is also igniting a pedestal. And that pedestal has a flame on it with a very familiar shape. That's right, that's the shape of the pineal gland. It has that same pine cone type of appearance. That is the all-seeing eye. That is what creates a halo over people's heads, supposedly. These angelic humanoid beings would open a stargate with their pineal gland, and that stargate would appear as a portal above them that you would literally see as a luminous ring, and then they would fly up into it, and that's how they would disappear. That was their form of portal travel. The pineal gland does appear to be key. It is wired into the visual cortex of the brain. It has the same wiring as we see coming off of the eyes. It has retinal tissue inside this hollow cavity, and then inside that cavity, the retinal tissue is looking at water. But the water is not just water, it has little crystals in it of DMT. And as I've talked about in many other lectures, if you smash DMT with a hammer, you get bright, brilliant colors, and it's not just one color, it's all different colors. So DMT talked about in many other lectures, if you smash DMT with a hammer, you get bright, brilliant colors, and it's not just one color, it's all different colors. So DMT is piezochromatic, meaning that it gives off different colors of light as it is compressed. So there's a compelling suggestion that the soul is somehow tethered to the pineal gland through a little stargate that we see when we go out of body as the silver cord. And what we see in our soul actually travels through that stargate and vibrates those crystals in the pineal gland, which are then picked up by the retinal cells and sent to the visual cortex. This is how you get psychic imagery. This is how remote viewing is ultimately being done. It's because we send some aspect of ourselves out of our bodies and the pineal gland picks it up. So it appears from what many, many esoteric traditions tell us that the pineal gland is only partially activated and that if it becomes fully activated, you now have the soul and the body dwelling together. You gain the ability to command physical matter, you can dematerialize, you can bilocate, you can fly. All of that has to do with pineal awakening. So again, even though Mithraism turned into this secret tradition for the Roman government, I don't believe at its core it was negative. Mithras had many things in common with Jesus, and the message was very similar, but there's a keen interest in this solar flash, which I find so astonishing, because that also indicates why those Freemasons and why the so-called Illuminati are so obsessed with the idea of the solar flash, with the idea of ascension. But because they turned it into a secret society, they kind of got off track, I believe, and feel that only people in their group are going to make it, that they are the ones who will usher in this new world order, which is much bigger than what we normally might think. They believe that they will turn into gods, but then they believe that everybody else is going to be being deceitful. They're not going to be here anymore. And the people who get to go through this ascension experience are the people who have a positive spiritual focus. Another really fascinating thing that I want to tell you in this episode is the combination of information that comes together when we look at Greek philosophy and understand how confused they got about the concept of a golden age. Because as it turns out, that concept that we now take for granted that everybody was talking about a golden age is wrong. And how did I find this? I found it from the Cambridge University academic journal. This is a picture of one example of it. It's called the Cambridge Classical Journal, and it has some very, very boring sounding things that they write about, like an essay on Anaxagoras. Now, I don't know about you, but trying to wade through something like that would probably be pretty dense. These texts are incredibly academic. You have to be able to read in Greek. You have to know the alphabet. You have to know what it means, how to sound it out. You have to be able to read foreign languages. You have to have a very, very high verbal IQ in terms of all these advanced words that you would only get in a spelling bee or maybe an SAT test if they really want to try to hurt you and make sure that nobody can get a perfect score. But this Cambridge Academic Journal had a quarterly publication called the Classical Quarterly, as you see here. And what I found through internet sleuthing was a paper in the Cambridge Quarterly from 1952 by H.C. Baldry, which means it could have been a man or a woman, we don't know, and it was entitled, "Who Invented the Golden Age?" Now, I'm setting all this up for a very important reason. I want to point out this is heavy-duty English academia. Cambridge is as good as it gets. You got Cambridge, you got Yale, then over here you got Harvard, MIT. Now, this is heavy-duty English academia. Cambridge is as good as it gets. You got Cambridge, you got Yale, then over here you got Harvard, MIT. There's only very few universities that are considered as respectable as Cambridge. So when a Cambridge academic in their journal makes a statement like this is not pseudoscience, it's not to be taken lightly, it is considered an accepted academic fact. But it got swept under the rug, and I happened to discover it by accident as I was doing research for my book, The Source Field Investigations. It is so important because the central argument that H.C. Baldry makes is that the term golden age actually translates as golden race. And this is really bizarre. Golden race? Yes. Golden race means beings that are light beings. It has nothing to do with any particular race or color or creed on Earth. Anybody could potentially become part of this golden race because that is the ascension. It's the same thing, and it's a tradition that shows up all throughout Greek and Roman philosophy. Nowadays, we hear it as golden age. That's not the way it originally was. Now, one of the things that I find really interesting is that it's a mistranslation of specific words. As you see here, the words are etos and secula. Both of these words are traditionally held in modern times as meaning age. Etos means age, and secula means age. So think about secula for a second. Secula, seclorum, novus ordo seclorum. It's right there on the dollar bill. And that is considered to be the New World Order, the New Age. But H.C. Baldry makes the compelling academic argument, which is really irrefutable, that Secula refers to a race. And that's the primary meaning, that it was only later misinterpreted as being referring to an age. So they simply jumbled around some words and confused us because they considered this teaching that positive beings actually wanted us to know to be a secret. They believed they were going to become the golden race. They didn't want us to know about it. So they changed the meaning of a couple of words, which is the same thing they did over and over again with the Bible as well, to hide things from us. So check it out. I'm going to read now from this Cambridge Classical Journal in 1952, and you'll hear it for yourself as you read what I saw when I read this. There are many passages in ancient literature which depict an imaginary existence different from the hardships of real life, an existence blessed with nature's bounty, untroubled by strife or want. Naturally, this happy state is always placed somewhere or sometime outside normal human experience, whether off the map in some remote quarter of the world, or in Elysium after death, or in the dim future or the distant past. So they're talking about this golden age. They're talking about this idea that the golden age seems to refer to something where everybody was really happy and really advanced, and they didn't get sick and they didn't die very easily. Their lifespans are much longer. It was a spiritually enlightened society, and somehow we lost it. And it does appear that before the fall of the pre-Adamites, before the Antarctic catastrophe where Atlantis becomes Antarctica, that we did have the Vedic culture that had this golden age type of thing going on at the same time that we had the pre-Adamites in Atlantis doing very evil things, and they needed to be cleansed, but everybody else was whisked away as part of this Noah's Ark idea. Now let's get back to this. Such an imaginary bliss in the past or the future has become known as the Golden Age. This is setting it all up. When first mentioned in Hesiod's Works and Days, it is not explained, but briefly alluded to as the state which men would now enjoy if the gods had not hidden the means of life from them. Now, the older we get, the more significant this is. So think about this. The idea of the Golden Age is something that it's like a spiritual ability, it's ascension, that we would have if certain benevolent ETs had not deliberately hidden it from us, if it hadn't have been taken away in some fundamental fashion. So that is significant. Now let's go back. References in later literature show an even greater variety of belief about the time and place of the happier life. It is a variety, this is very important, that cannot be traced back to Hesiod or any other single source, but suggests an old and widespread tradition, handled at different times and places and by different authors in many different ways. So here we have this hardcore Cambridge academic openly stating that this idea of ascension, this idea of a golden age, this idea of a spiritual interpenetration with the physical body, that we become some kind of meta-human, cannot be traced to any one particular location in time or space. It is something more. It is something bigger. There is something going on here. There is a mystery. There is an underlying secret of who we really are, and times that were lost before and times that will come again that cannot be attributed to any one source. That suggests that there is, in fact, some kind of orchestrated extraterrestrial effort coming from the outside, if you will, to teach us this, to teach us this again and again. And that's exactly what I've been arguing as well. Further confirmation may be sought in the various parallels contained in Eastern literature, notably the Indo-Iranian myth in which Yima of the Zoroastrian Avesta and Yama of the Hindu Vedas must have had their common source. Well, this is really interesting because now this author, H.C. Baldry, is openly talking about the Zoroastrian solar flash prophecy, the Hindu Samvartika fire, and the clear idea that it leads to a golden age, and this underlying idea that even though Zoroastrianism is over here in Iran and was not supposedly appearing until at least 1800 BC, and then you have Hinduism that may be much older, that he or she is now saying There must be a single, unified, underlying source. That's a compelling argument to make. They don't really speculate as to where that source is or what it is, but I am, and I'm saying there's a whole lot of ETs around us. They haven't gone anywhere. They have to kind of stay in the background right now, but they gave us these prophecies again and again about the golden age. But is it really a golden age or is it something else? Let's keep reading. The story of a past age of happiness under a ruler who, when that age ended, the ruler became the lord of a paradise inhabited by the souls of the blessed. Gold played no part in the generally accepted picture of those whom Hesiod called the golden race. These Greek authors, like Hesiod, all refer to a golden race. It is only in Latin poetry that this is sometimes replaced by a golden age. My goodness. Once I found this, and it was right during the time that I was putting together Sourcefield. Up until then, I had always assumed that golden age means golden age, that it's just a statement about some kind of age that we go through in which everything is wonderful and peaceful and we have these ascended forms. What I didn't realize until I read this Cambridge academic paper is that the term golden age really means golden race, and it was only occasionally changed to golden age by certain Latin poets, but all the Greeks and all the Romans were secretly, apparently, referring to it as a golden race, an ascended light body situation that happens. That's a very, very different interpretation of what we're looking at. Now let's keep reading. Gold, far from having a place in the traditional picture, was actually seen as one of the causes of degeneration from that happy state. And that's interesting too, because this author is saying, you know, some people might think that a golden age means that you have lots of gold, and it's all about money, and it's all about how wealthy you are and how much stuff you have. Whereas this author, this Cambridge author, is very clearly saying gold not only did not have a place in this, the physical gold, but it was actually, the acquiring of gold is a sign that we are sliding back from that place of being this golden race. As we become enchanted with the money system, as we start to have rich and poor, as we start to have the control of the masses through this type of domination, we're losing touch with that spiritual core that comes about through a life of simplicity, a life of modesty, a life of honesty and virtue. Now let's go back to reading. It was Roman writers who made the transition from a golden race to a golden age, and from them the concept was Logos type of being, Mithras, who manifests here on earth, who clearly seems to be a precursor to Jesus. He has very similar parts to the story, and he's doing the Jesus tricks, he's doing the magic, he's teaching about compassion, he's teaching about love, but there's also a very clear and concise description of a solar flash. It is even reenacted in the lodge with this idea of the lion-headed, the sun, blowing fire out of its mouth. And this, of course, becomes the real secret underpinning of the Roman mystery school, which was how they were able to plot out conquest of the world. They have secrets, secret handshakes, everybody is sworn to secrecy upon pain of death, and they have this really amazing spiritual core that literally is telling the disciples of these faiths that if you follow what we're teaching you, you will become like a god, you'll be able to fly, you'll be able to manifest objects with your mind, and we will inherit the earth. So I really do feel that they contorted the meaning all around, and that we are dealing with the world now being run by a fundamentalist, zealous religious cult, where their religion is this idea that they, in fact, are going to inherit the earth when this happens. One of the unfortunate aspects of what occurred is that the Leontocephalus itself is often equated with Lucifer. That's right. One of the names for it is Ahriman, which is another name for Lucifer. So they literally think that the sun is the embodiment of Lucifer, which doesn't even make any sense to me. But that's how people contort things around. So it's only once we have the Romans come in that they strip away this idea of the golden race and they turn it into a golden age, and they rob us of the knowledge that was handed down through the Greeks, going all the way back to Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, Egyptian prophecy, the Book of Enoch, all of these things I've been talking about, saying that the sun is going to give off a mighty flash and that we'll be activated into this golden race. Dumbing it down to golden age keeps it more benign. If you don't really study this stuff, golden age could be a lot less intense. It doesn't mean people are turning into light beings. It has a much lower level of emotional significance than this idea of us actually ascending. So I'm happy after all this time that all of these distortions, thanks to the power of the internet, can be stripped away, and we can get back to the original teachings and see amazing complementarity between what was taught in the oldest times of antiquity and what we're now hearing again from alleged extraterrestrial contacts, as well as from our own classified programs where they've studied this and they're fully anticipating some kind of solar flash. We're going to have more on this idea of a golden race coming up next time. Well, that's all the time we have in this episode of Wisdom Teachings, bringing you the information you need that will set you free. I'm David Wilcock, and I thank you for watching.